Hello everybody and welcome back to my Night Terrors coverage. Let's take a look at weeks 2 and 3 of the event with another round of tie-ins. We're going to kick things off this week with Night Terrors Flash by Alex Packnadil and Daniel Bayliss. Barry Allen is the star of this tie-in as sleep comes for the hero thanks to the Nightmare Wave, and he finds himself in a terrible nightmare where Kid Flash has been grievously injured by Gorilla Grodd, who has stabbed the young hero with the Spear of Destiny. Barry embarks on a journey to try and undo the event, learning from Wally that something has infested the Speed Force. There's this great moment where Barry, beset by anger that one of his rogues has overstepped the line, barges into Grodd's cell at Iron Heights and lays out the gorilla with some super speed punches. He's quick to stop himself though, but I love the implication that Alex writes here that the Flash and his rogues have this sort of unwritten, unspoken rule about not killing each other. Like, yeah, sure, they'll battle each other and fight and try to kill each other, but when it comes to the actual act, they usually never really cross that line, do they? Alex uses the beating of Grodd to let the hero in on something being completely wrong with him and the world around him, and it spurs Barry on to try and reverse the events of what happened to Wally, which leads him to encountering Hal Jordan. Only this time it's Hal from Final Night, from when he got himself killed by absorbing a Sun Eater, events Barry wasn't actually around for, since at that point in comics history he was still dead from Crisis of Infinite Earths. Of course, Flash time traveling is never really a good thing, and the Speed Force doesn't want him doing so when he makes his way back in time, Barry finds himself actively disintegrating by the second. Barry, of course, isn't able to stop Wally getting stabbed, and it comes to the issue's big reveal, which is the monster Wally saw in the Speed Force is actually Barry. It's a neat little reveal that's signposted throughout the issue, and I like Alex is using the tie-in to explore both how Wally is always trying to live up to the legend of Barry Allen, and Barry is always worried about Wally not being ready for his role as Kid Flash, and that he might get hurt since he's quite young and inexperienced and arrogant. It's very fitting and on character for the Flash to be his own nightmare, especially seeing that, his greatest villain is literally the reverse of him. It's also a rather unique take on the whole nightmare thing, since each hero is getting a physical manifestation of their nightmare to battle, yet Flash's is something that has always existed there, and something he's confronted many times, so I'm interested to see just how Alex puts his unique spin on it in the next issue. Daniel Bayliss's haunting artwork wonderfully captures Barry's feeling of helplessness and anger throughout the issue. His final pages with the slow disintegrating Flash looked brilliant, and I really like when artists depict an in-motion Flash with the elongated limbs and kind of smear him over the page to visualize the speed. It's always very fun to see how an artist is going to tackle the speed, and this is probably my favorite depiction of it. All in all, Night Terrors Flash issue 1 did a great job setting up Barry's nightmare and exploring his and Wally's relationship and the hopes and fears they both have for one another, while also setting up a cool take on the whole nightmares concept in general. Next up, we have Night Terrors Green Lantern issue 1 by Jeremy Adams, Alex Segura, Eduardo Pansica, and Fox Fokillo. This issue picks up from the ending of Green Lantern issue 2 with Hal on his jet ride with Carol and her fiance Nathan, but quickly it dives into Hal's nightmare world, which involves his dead father. Now obviously the whole premise of Night Terrors is scary nightmares, and being Hal is a Green Lantern who has no fear, what can insomnia possibly show him? Well, Jeremy Adams takes Hal on a kind of greatest hits of his fears, beginning with his father and him dying in a horrible plane crash, to Abin Sur, who lures Hal in to suck the life force out of him so he can continue being the Green Lantern, and Hal never gets to be the Green Lantern. Then of course we get Hal being told he'll never be enough to save everyone and everything, and of course the end is Hal battling Parallax, because of course he has to. Because of all this issue feels like the weakest of the Night Terrors so far. It's far too obvious in where it's going to go with the story and the fears, since it's one we've seen 100 times before. I don't blame Adams for this at all, since he only had 2 issues of his new Green Lantern run before it got railroaded into joining the Night Terrors series, so he's just making the best of a not so ideal situation. Alex Segura, on the other hand, makes use of the backup really well as we catch up with Sinestro, who, if you remember at the end of issue 1 of the Green Lantern book, is on Earth and hiding out in Coast City, so he too is affected by the Nightmare Wave. Segura looks at Sinestro's craving for power and how he views himself as a complete failure, with with his biggest fear being himself and what he was and could be, as Sinestro is left to seemingly fight a heroic version of himself. And I think that's kind of a cool concept. He's fighting a hero, and being a hero is like one of his biggest fears, which is quite cool. Night Terror's Green Lantern issue 1 was a mostly predictable letdown, but one I don't blame on the writers one bit, being their ongoing was interrupted right when things were starting to get cooking in issue 2, so they made good on a tricky situation. It just so happens that it's all things we've seen loads of times before. Next we have Night Terror's Robin by Kenny Porter and Miguel Mendonca. Instead of picking up with the Damian plotline we saw in the Night Terror's main book, Porter instead chooses to base the story around Tim Drake and Jason Todd, a current Robin and a Robin of the past. The heroes are taken right in the middle of their respective missions and dropped into their nightmare world that reminds me a lot of the Scarecrow Dreamworld levels in the Arkham series of games. Both get separated and venture through their respective worlds, with Tim taken back to his father's apartment the day Captain Boomerang killed him in Identity Crisis, and Jason is dragged into an industrial maze where he is confronted by his mother. It's here both confront the sleepless knights sent to kill them, with one looking like the original Red Hood and the other looking like a cloaked zombified version of Tim. Porter takes each of these Robins through their own grief and how, despite being diametrically opposed, Tim and Jason have quite a bit in common. They both have the one person they failed to save and being forced to relive that person's death over and over. Like the Green Lantern one though, this issue was a little predictable, but I do enjoy the team up of Tim and Jason. Tim was the Robin after Jason died, so they have a very troubled history towards each other, and we briefly explore that in the early pages of the issue, something which I'm looking forward to getting explored more in the second issue. Miguel Mendonca's art is fittingly trippy, and as I said before, I love the Arkham Asylum inspired nightmare world the heroes find themselves in, with the floating buildings and clock towers and everything. Miguel also seemingly referenced the famous Man of Steel issue 37 cover from the 0 Hour event by John Bogdanov, with Jason surrounded by various Red Hood sleepless knights. The Knights' designs were also really great, although I felt the Red Hood one was a bit more creative than Tim's, just being literally him but in a grey colour scheme that felt a little bit lazy. Night Terror's Robin, much like the Green Lantern one, was fairly predictable in what the nightmares and problems the heroes are going to face were, but I'm excited for the Jason-Tim team-up dynamic, as it feels like a long time coming that they can finally get together and sort of hash out the problems they have with one another. Shazam is up next with a tie-in by Mark Waid and Roger Cruz. Now this issue is a Mary Marvel nightmare adventure, as we are thrust into Mary's dreams, and it's a pretty hardcore one as Billy has become a Black Adam like Shazam, and he torments Mary and her heroic drive to save people, especially her family, who currently don't have access to the magic of Shazam, and it's something that evil Billy takes advantage of, ruthlessly killing the family over and over, and in some cases subjecting Mary to horrible events she cannot, even with all her power, prevent. I thoroughly enjoyed the shift to focus on Mary and how she's been dealing with being the champion of Shazam, the pressure that's on her, not just as a hero, but also as the eldest sibling to others, and how she feels she must protect them now that they don't have their own powers to protect themselves with. One interesting aspect about the entire Nightmare Wave premise is that thanks to Mary's powers, she has a little bit more awareness of what's going on, and Insomnia suggests that it might be thanks to her wisdom of Solomon giving her some sort of clairvoyance. The one thing though I was hoping this issue would have explored is the difference between Mary Marvel and Mary Bromfield. Like maybe she would have different nightmares when she is the hero or when she's just the normal Mary, and how those two lives could easily blur together because she's more Mary Marvel than she is Mary Bromfield. The really brutal ending though makes me hopeful that Wade still wants to explore Mary and Billy's relationship a little more, both as heroes and as siblings. Roger Cruz is no stranger to the Shazam family, and he provides some lovely colourful artwork for Mary's nightmare. I especially love the big double-page spread he did of Mary halfway through the book where she's in a burning building with her family, unable to protect them, and it perfectly captures her fear and hopelessness in the situation. Night Terror's Shazam issue 1 continued Mary Marvel's adventures, focusing on her role as a hero and elder sibling, and the fears and nightmares that come with that pressure. Though while it was quite predictable, I did like the sort of Groundhog Day-like setting with her having to relive these horrible things happening to her family and her unable to stop them even with all her power. Lastly, for week 2 in the tie-ins for Night Terrors, we have Zatanna's tie-in by Dennis Culver and David Baldion, and this one was by far my favourite of the week 2 books. Zatanna was present for the opening salvo of the Nightmare Wave, and this issue picks up on her and sees her having to protect the sleeping Detective Chimp and Wonder Woman from the Sleepless Queen, who thinks that Zatanna has the Nightmare Stone or knows where it is and will stop at nothing to get it for her master Insomnia. To help her defend herself and the unconscious heroes, Zatanna turns to her magic to bring her another hero as backup, and since pickings were slim since most were asleep, it saddles her with Robot Man from the Doom Patrol, putting them on a mission to get the sleeping heroes to a magical panic room deep within inside the Justice League Dark headquarters. Now this is quite a fun pairing since Zatanna and Cliff couldn't be further from each other, both in the stars of heroes they are and the types of people they are. Dennis plays around with that a lot, making them an unlikely duo that bicker with one another over how each operate. Despite being awake as well, they are still subject to nightmarish visions as the sleepless nights bombard them with illusions of the people around the heroes who have died, either because of them or in part because of their actions. This brings both heroes together as Zatanna is assaulted by nightmares of her father, who was killed in a seance which Mento, a former member of the Doom Patrol, attended, something Zatanna has always struggled with as she has nightmares of Mento's face during the incident, so then saddling her with a Doom Patrol member isn't exactly something she is very happy about. Robot Man meanwhile deals with his dead friends Dorothy, Josh, and Kate, among various others, and these events bring Zatanna and Cliff closer together as they realize they have quite a bit in common and they are both able to team up and take down their respective issues. The issue takes a real swerve here at the end as the Sleepless Queen, who actually isn't in the issue all that much despite her big debut at the start of the issue that made it look like she's going to be a recurring thing, ends up stabbing Robot Man and, in her words, knighting him, transforming him into one of her generals called the Rustbringer. This is where David Baldion really shines as his designs for the new villains are super cool. The final pages with Robot Man's transformations are where it really gets good, leaning into the body horror elements that come with Cliff and his role as Robot Man and giving him a great distended limb look and a crown made of the ripped open parts of his head and brain. Night Terrors Zatanna delivered a wonderfully unique team up with two completely different yet very similar characters, exploring the concepts of loss and survivor's guilt amongst some of the Night Terrors' best monster designs and artwork so far. So that was week 2 of Night Terrors, and overall it was okay, if a little predictable in some of the stories it was trying to tell. I thoroughly enjoyed the couple of team-ups we got from Robin, Red Hood, Robot Man, and Zatanna. They were really fun and not what I was expecting at all. So now let's move on to week 3's tie-ins, and we'll kick things off with Night Terrors Superman by Joshua Williamson and Tom Riley. Superman has succumbed to the deadly sleep of insomnia, and as he plummets towards Earth, he enters a nightmare realm filled with his biggest fears. Now Williamson, who's been writing the Superman ongoing, tackles Clark's fears in 3 interesting ways. We get the pretty obvious one where Clark's biggest nightmare is him not being able to save everyone on Earth. It's pretty run-of-the-mill and stuff we've seen covered a myriad of times before, but the next 2 are the ones that I really like, one being that the world ends up never needing saving again, making Clark feel that he's not really needed anymore and what is his place now. And the last one is him being sent to Earth was like Krypton shooting a bullet at the planet, as so much death and destruction has supposedly been wrought with Clark coming to the Earth, and no matter what he tries to do, he can no longer escape this loneliness and death. Those are some pretty cool ways to explore Superman's existence, and they are a very human fear to have. You know, thinking about what type of mark you've left on the world around you and the people around you too. Not only does Williamson explore all of this, we also get a new sleepless night general in the form of the Man of Screams, a visual manifestation of Clark's nightmares, which look like a giant red angel of death, which shepherds Clark all the way from his rocket leaving Krypton to Earth being destroyed by him arriving, almost like something out of a Dickens Christmas Carol. The villain is sent after Clark to try and get the Nightmare Stone, which Nightmare is looking through the minds of the heroes for, believing that this is where Dr. Destiny hid the stone. Tom Riley jumps in as the book's artist here, and like every other artist on the event so far, makes a meal out of the premise with some really fantastic monster designs. Like I said before, the Man of Screams and his cool giant angel of death look. It's also very uneasy art to look at, as Tom's style favors a little bit more of the softer, kind of cartoony look. Think of other artists like Chris Sammy or Doc Shanna. So you have this harder edged, uneasy, nightmare fuel story stuff happening within the style that he does, which is very light and cartoony, very brighter colors. And I think that's a brilliant choice. It makes it very uneasy to look at, and again, feels that whole dream vibe where everything is kind of off in some way, but you can't really put your finger on why. The color purple is still being prevalent throughout all of these tie-ins, and it's great here too, especially with Superman's whole outfit contrasting very nicely against the light and dark purples. Superman is not alone in his nightmare here, as Supergirl manages to smash her way into her cousin's mind, most likely due to the bond they share, being family and being the last survivors of Krypton. However, Kara is also running from what was in her mind, which is the zombified past iterations of herself, who constantly pursue her to try and kill her. It's been a while since we've had a proper Superman and Supergirl team up together, so I'm looking forward to seeing them go through the nightmares and maybe even help each other overcome their fears. The big cliffhanger of the issue is quite interesting as well, as Superman, among other people around the world, have been found by Aquaman and his family, who are very much awake somehow. Like what Williamson has been doing over in the main Night Terrors book with Deadman and Sandman, I love that he's using every chance he can to make the event about the unusual heroes, or heroes who don't usually headline big DC events, and it's about time that Arthur and his family and the other Atlantean heroes had their go and got to have a bit of a comeback. Williamson and Riley's Superman tie-in to the Night Terrors was pretty simple yet effective, exploring some aspects of Superman's greatest fears we've seen done before, while providing some interesting new aspects to that, as well as a neat new villain for Superman to fight. Next up, we have Night Terrors Nightwing by Becky Cloonan, Michael W. Conrad, and Danielle DiNicuolo. Nightwing finds himself incarcerated in Arkham Asylum with all of Gotham's worst villains, unable to remember what happened or what caused him to be arrested, making me immediately think of Shutter Island, a movie the comic writers are constantly inspired by. Throughout the course of the issue, Nightwing is subject to torture at the hands of Insomnia, who, despite being the main villain of the event, hasn't really had a direct hand in a lot of the hero's tie-ins. His influence has been there, but he hasn't been there physically. Yet he's taking quite a direct approach with Dick here, almost likely thanks to his relationship with Batman, which is at the core of Dick's nightmare, as the crime he committed was killing Batman. Knowing all of this is just a dream though, Dick is forced to team up with Scarecrow and some of the other villains to plan a breakout of Arkham. Cloonan and Conrad don't waste any time getting right into the nightmare, foregoing some of the stuff we saw in some of the other tie-ins that show us what the heroes were up to before the nightmare took over, and instead just dropping us right into the middle of it. I am a little bit disappointed that Tom Taylor wasn't writing this, since he's writing the main Nightwing book, so you would think that he would want to write this as well. But Cloonan and Conrad's voice for Dick is very much in line with Taylor's work, yet there is also a slight distortion to Dick's character. He's a little angrier and reactive thanks to what's happening, and it fits in nicely with this all being a nightmare world where everything is familiar, yet just a little off, or a little bit different. I'm also really happy about the issue not tackling something Dick has dealt with thousands of times before. In fact, there is a part where his parents' corpses turn up and Dick immediately knows this is a dream, or he's being manipulated into thinking of this since it's happened before, giving him a little bit of self-awareness of what's going on. The issue ends with a reveal that Barbara is being imprisoned in Arkham too, and not just that, she's now seemingly part cyborg, something I'm looking forward to being explored in the next issue. Danielle DiNicuolo's visual depiction of Dick's nightmare was wonderfully terrifying, utilizing some really cool paneling and interesting angles to give the book a real claustrophobic, cramped feel, almost like you're in a small cell in Arkham Asylum. Night Terrors Nightwing was a satisfying beginning to Dick's nightmare world, teasing out a pretty stock standard mystery for him to solve, but it ends with a really cool cliffhanger that's going to keep me hooked for the final part next issue. Next up, Danny Law and Lucas Meyer tackle Punchline of all characters, whose issue begins with her and the Royal Flush Gang heisting their way through Gotham, finding themselves immune to the nightmare wave that has taken over the city, or so they thought. Punchline's crimes don't go unanswered as Batgirl comes to confront Alexis, but then the unthinkable happens and the villain ends up killing Batgirl. Punchline doesn't question these events and takes over Batgirl's clock tower base, only to be attacked by a zombified Batgirl who, in a weird bit of maybe connective tissue with the Nightwing tie-ins, turns into a weird cyborg monster and hunts down Punchline. Writer Danny Law seems to be approaching this tie-in with one simple premise. What if Punchline touched grass? And that's a great idea, as Punchline is a way out of her depth social influencer pretending to be a supervillain. And I really like that Law used the inner monologue of Punchline, who thinks that she's so much better than everyone else because she's quote unquote awake and realizes what's happening in the world and everything, and what's really going on is just totally unaware of what is actually going on, and now that she has stumbled into something that is made her completely out of her depth. It's a great depiction of a terminally online person being met with a sobering reality of the situation, which happens when Batgirl transforms into this cyborg amalgamation of the hero and her Oracle computer systems, who's intent on capturing Alexis and dragging her back into the online world. Artist Lucas Meyer's depiction of Punchline's waking nightmare is fantastic, filling each page with a lot of cool little details and design choices. I'm always a fan of creepy body horror robots, and Lucas gives us a real disgusting design for the cyborg Batgirl, and I love it and I can't wait to see more of it next issue. Night Terror's Punchline took a terminally online villain and gave her a bit of a reality check, sending her on an intriguing adventure that tests her beliefs on what is real and what isn't. Now we're going to stick in Gotham for now with Night Terror's Catwoman by Tini Howard and Leela Leitz. Selina's latest heist is interrupted by Sister Zero, Selina's actual sister, who is intent on stopping Catwoman before she destroys Gotham again. Most of the front half of the issue is actually about Sister Zero and how Selina sees Maggie's life as a nun, exploring the difference between both women since both are diametrically opposed in almost every single way. Sister Zero is all about religion and absolving one of sin, while Selina is just really all about sin and crime and everything. Selina's rule of the mob bosses is explored in her nightmare as well, with her control going horribly wrong and she's been left horribly scarred by the incident, leaving her thinking Joker is behind everything she's been seeing, sending her and Sister Zero out to look for the villain and stop him before he destroys everything. Only it's not the Joker she's been hunting, it's Insomnia, who has taken over a very Joker-like form to torment Selina with. Selina's obsession with taking down the Joker ultimately ends up getting Maggie shot, but Batman saves her. Batman's part in this book is a version that is very early on in his career, and he's there to try and stop Catwoman and stop her rule of Gotham. After a series of events that see Batman being saved by Catwoman from a snake bite, Selina realizes this is a younger, inexperienced Batman and one she can mold to her liking, and the book leaves off with her intending on teaching this Batman everything she knows. Temptation is at the core of the book, and Howard plays with the temptations Selina has really quite well, to the point where you really forget that this is just some little tie-in to a larger event, since it's not written like how a normal tie-in is written. It's intelligent and actually has a lot of really deep themes. Now, I fully admit I was a little lost on some of the stuff in this issue, being that I'm not reading what's happening in the Catwoman ongoing currently, and this issue is very much ingrained in what is happening in that. But the tie-in does a good job to try and explain certain things to help readers who probably are just picking this book up because it is part of Night Terrors, you know, the completionists who maybe aren't reading the Catwoman book. So I do like they did explain very much little things like her and Sister Zero's relationship and how that is all working out and everything, and what her role in the city is at the moment. Leela Litz's artwork was probably the best of the Night Terrors tie-ins this week. It was so dark and dreary, then it shifted to brilliant, vibrant colors in an instant when they were fighting the Joker Insomnia amalgamation, making the nightmare look even more unsettling. I also like the theme of snakes throughout this issue, and I'm not sure if that's something that's running in the actual Catwoman ongoing, but I like what Leitz did with them and sort of depicting them in weird shapes and ways throughout the issue, and makes it really unsettling since snakes are something I don't particularly like, and I don't think Catwoman and Sister Zero like them all too much as well, especially since they have a very religious connection with temptation and sin, so I quite like the depiction of that throughout the issue. Night Terror's Catwoman was an extremely intelligent book saddled with a so far rather average event, exploring the themes of temptation really well, with Selina confronting her relationship with her sister, the Joker, and of course Batman. Lastly, we have Night Terror's Wonder Woman by Josie Campbell, Stephanie Williams, Juan Ferreira, and Megan Hetrick. Diana was present for the beginning of the Night Terrors event, and we find her in a shared nightmare with the rest of the sleeping Justice League Dark team, all who are very aware of what is happening and are being hunted through a mythical Minoan labyrinth by the Sleepless Knights. Campbell makes great use of Diana and her team's powers right from the get-go, especially the lasso of truth, which Diana tethers the team together with so they'll always know what's real and what isn't within their shared dreams. The book follows Diana, Detective Chimp, and Constantine as they move through each's respective dreams. Wonder Woman encounters a new sleepless knight called the Truth, made up of various Greek myths, who mocks Diana's heroics, revealing Diana will eventually become this monster herself. Constantine, meanwhile, is in a world where Zatanna and the other heroes have forgotten who he is after he drove them away with his constant lies and mockery, leaving him all alone in a world where he can see so much. Detective Chimp, though, is completely underutilized this issue, as we never actually see his fears, only getting a brief, pretty cool team up with John as they battle various demons and monsters. It does, however, end up serving a role at the end of the issue, as his presence distracts Wonder Woman enough and ends up with her being eaten by the Truth, something I'm hoping we explore next issue and how Bobo will factor into Diana's rescue from the Sleepless Knight. Juan Ferreira, one of my favorite comic book artists over at DC at the moment, tackles Diana and her team's adventures with his distinctive, soft, watercolor-like visual style, fitting the dream world very nicely. His monster designs as well were cool, borrowing heavily from John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. The Justice League Dark aren't the only ones with a story, as Stephanie Williams brings the nightmare wave to Themyscira and Queen Nubia, whose nightmare pulls her into the Well of Souls, or the Well of Horrors, by Seraph, a being who wants the Queen to help her deal with an infection of the well by the creatures from Tartarus. Since this is a nightmare and not all is what it seems, Nubia is quick to realize that Seraph released these monsters, but it's too late to stop her, as she has also corrupted Gaia, turning the god into a hideous giant monster. This was one of the more simpler Night Terror storyline, mainly probably because it was a backup issue and only had a limited amount of page time, but I appreciate Williams giving Nubia the opportunity to be part of this event in some capacity, as well as exploring more of the Themysciran culture and lore. Something I really like about those characters is the lore and all of the ingrained Greek myths and legends. Megan Hetrick's chaotic artwork worked really well for the story set within the Well of Souls, making great use of some new monsters that combined familiar Greek myth elements with strange, demonic alien designs. So that's it for weeks 2 and 3 of Night Terrors. There's definitely a lot to like there, but a lot of it is also a little mediocre. But nothing so far has been outright terrible, which is quite a good sign. All of the books also continue to outdo themselves in monster designs and artwork, which is a big plus in my book. Thank you so much for joining me for this video, and if you want to check out more of my content, why not check out my reviews of the limited series Superman Lost or the Adventures of Superman John Kent.